But this still leaves a problem. And this is the one that interests me the most. What happens if I can't tell what experience I want to have? So if, for example, I'm listening to music, one person's pleasurable experience will be another person's nightmare. So what I've got to look for is some way of understanding how I can actually find the right experience. So the previous methods work extremely well when you can tell what experience you're looking for. But if a product has what in the jargon we call hedonic features, i.e. features that give you pleasure, it can be very, very difficult because those features vary considerably from individual to individual. No car manufacturer is going to be able to tell me whether I want a particular car because it will give me bragging rights in the neighborhood, and I can say I've got a better car than you. That's what gives me pleasure. No clothes manufacturer can say these clothes are going to be exactly the fit and style that you want to have, you as an individual. So what we've got to do is to find a way where we can identify like-minded groups of consumers and explicitly or implicitly present those choices to a consumer for their consideration. So I came across this with my involvement in the Netflix Prize. The Netflix Prize is a competition to try and predict video preferences. So Netflix, a video organization in the United States, made available 100 million ratings and asked people if they could predict what the other 2 million ratings were going to be. Now they've got something like 2,500 teams working on this, ranging from top universities to individuals, odd individuals, I'd say, like myself. I'm standing in at number 7 at the moment with just a guy in a garage. But the important thing to take from that is not the competition, or not in this case, although it's an interesting exercise in itself, they can get so many people working on their particular problem. But the leaders in the competition have approximately double the state of the art in terms of the accuracy of prediction. So whereas before if you presented 10 choices to a consumer and they were interested in 2, it's now possible to present 10 choices to a consumer and they will be interested in 4. So what we can do now is we can really increase our ability to understand and identify exactly what consumer experiences a particular consumer is going to enjoy. And how do we do it? Well, for example, if you stick with movies, we can say with confidence that if you like Platoon, it'll also be true that you will like these particular movies. Now, if you look at these movies, and I don't know how many of you know these movies, but they're not just war movies. They're war movies about Vietnam, and in most of these movies, the key character has some kind of crisis of conscience in the middle of that particular episode or war. So we can now identify very tight groups of objects which will give a consumer a similar experience. We take a more subtle example, Lost in Translation. If you look at the movies that people like around Lost in Translation, we can see they fall into 3 groups. We find some people like Bill Murray movies, who was the lead male character. We find a lot of people like Scarlett Johansson, the lead female character. And probably a predominance of people actually like movies about romance, about loneliness, and about couples. Now, it's possible, just from analyzing purchase data, to identify the different groups who will like these different kinds of movies. So how does that work? Well, let's take this customer here. They've watched 5 movies. And let's take another customer and see what else that they've watched. So we can see in this particular case that the 2 customers... Let's see if we get this to work. These 2 customers have 3 movies which overlap: Lost in Translation, Garden State, and Before Sunrise. So we can say that these 2 customers are fairly similar to each other. So for the customer on the left, we would probably recommend the movies on the right: Before Sunset, I Love Huckabees, and The Aquatic Life of Steve Zissou. And for the customer on the left, we would probably recommend Ghost World and The Ice Storm. So by comparing customers' purchase patterns, we can identify what sort of movies they're likely to watch. Of course, we don't just do that for 2 customers, but we can overlay more customers. So the customer on the left, we now find he overlaps with 2 other customers, and both of them have watched Before Sunset. So that increases the likelihood. And what we want to do is to recommend Before Sunset to that customer, and when they receive it, they will enjoy it. And I don't know how many of you have taken part or use these kind of tools and techniques, but they really are now getting very powerful, can really help a consumer make a decision. It's not rocket science, really, how you do it. Although mathematically it can be quite complicated, conceptually it's simple. First of all, you remove any effects of ratings or different ways that people have interacted with the site to get an understanding of an underlying preference score. You identify groups of people with similar preferences, and then you recommend movies that one member of the group rates highly to those in the group who've not seen it. And really, I would expect now almost all internet sites, if they're really going to help the consumer, they should be using these kinds of techniques to actually ensure that the consumers understand what experiences they're going to enjoy with what products they might purchase. These techniques, although not completely mainstream, are becoming more rapidly so. I don't know how many of you use iTunes. A few. But they now have a Genius bar. You're playing a song, it'll recommend other songs that are both in your library and that you might like to purchase that are similar to it. A very powerful way of driving out new music. It will tell you songs by the same artist that it thinks are the key songs that people enjoy. And it even works with obscure music. So here we're listening to an American composer, Aaron Copland, listening to some of the classical music. Even with that kind of music, they have enough data now to make some recommendations down the right side, which are relevant to me and my listening habits. I particularly happen to enjoy this composer, so I went and purchased some of these on the right-hand side. And again, it's providing those kind of techniques that I think will revolutionize the way, in which we start to purchase products. And it is this century, I think, that will enable us to do that. And the internet economy and the bits economy enable us to do that through the gathering of information from our consumers. Some of the main work that I'm working on at the moment is looking at dating sites. If you tell me 5 women or 5 men that you fancy, and you can spin through these very quickly, then we can very closely identify those other people that you would like to get in touch with. So I think it's not just when it comes to movies, it's not just when it comes to films, but there are many other areas which you've barely begun to scratch the surface on, where we can start to gather this information and start to find ways of communicating to the partners. Now, we're getting enormous success in terms of uptake of email addresses and swaps on these dating sites, where we're starting to incorporate these sorts of features. And not only can we tell you what women or men that you would like, we can also tell you whether they're likely to like you in return. So again, the whole idea of dating, or the dating and the way that we do this, is changing. We can provide a service. We can provide a service that helps you identify the person that you want to, out of maybe 1.1 million people of the opposite sex that are on these sites, and also we can tell them whether they're likely to respond. And what we're finding is that's changing the behavior of people who are using these kinds of websites. But what happens if you haven't got rating data? What happens if you aren't a retailer and you don't have masses of purchase data? Well, the trick is to try and find other ways of identifying similar consumer groups. And there is an enormous amount of work going into looking at all the different social media and other networks on the internet to identify like-minded groups of consumers. I was at a conference in the States recently. There were 500 people there, and there were just hundreds of people from Yahoo and from Google and from Microsoft, all trying to work out how to understand these different social networks that are springing up, and how we can use those social networks to enable people to make better consumer choices. And it goes on. So here we're currently engaged with a customer, and I'm sorry to give this example. We're working with a mortgage company to identify which consumers are most likely to default on their mortgage if the price of their house falls below their outstanding loan they have. And again, we can apply the same kinds of techniques. We can look for social groups who have defaulted on their mortgage and compare their characteristics to social groups who haven't defaulted on their mortgage. And we can start to get some very accurate pictures of who's likely to default and who's likely not to default. I will skip through this, but just in the interest of time. But the point is that we can use the attitudes and beliefs that we discover to develop appropriate marketing, sales, or management strategies. And these can be both on and off the internet. So not only can we identify what it is that they might like to purchase, but we can talk about the tone that they like to be talked to or communicated to in terms of direct marketing. We look at value propositions. We can look at cross-selling potential. We can look at different consumer treatments. If you can identify the data, then it's likely that it can be used to improve audience engagement. So the trick is, and the advice I'd give you if you're starting on a website, collect everything you can, because you never know what might come in useful. I'd like to finish with some work that we've been doing with a company called BETV, which is an Israeli startup, which is trying to help people discover what to watch on television, especially in the States, but now we have many, many channels that we can watch. So how can we actually find what appropriate television to watch? I think the key and the catchphrase that we're using is you shouldn't have to go looking for the content. You should let the content find you. So what I'd like to do is just to show you how this works. But this still leaves a problem. And this is the one that interests me the most. What happens if I can't tell what experience I want to have? So if, for example, I'm listening to music, one person's pleasurable experience will be another person's nightmare. So what I've got to look for is some way of understanding how I can actually find something like 2,500 teams working on this, ranging from top universities to individuals, odd individuals, I say, like myself. I'm standing in at number 7 at the moment with just a guy in a garage. But the important thing to take from that is not the competition, or not in this case, although it's an interesting exercise in itself. They can get many people working on their particular problem. But the leaders in the competition have approximately double the state bragging rights in the neighborhood, and I can say I've got a better car than you. That's what gives me pleasure. No clothes manufacturer can say these clothes are going to be exactly the fit and style that you want to have, you as an individual. So what we've got to do is to find a way where we can identify like-minded groups of consumers and explicitly or implicitly write experience. So the previous methods work extremely well when you can tell what experience you're looking for. But if a product has what in the jargon we call hedonic features, i.e. features that give you pleasure, it can be very, very difficult because those features vary considerably from individual to individual. No car manufacturer is going to be able to tell me whether I want a particular car because it will present those choices to a consumer for their consideration. So I came across this with my involvement in the Netflix Prize. The Netflix Prize is a competition to try and predict video preferences. So Netflix, a video organization in the United States, made available 100 million ratings and asked people if they could predict what the other 2 million ratings were going to be. Now they've got